Did you know it was reported that less than 19% of one of the many master plans of Bengaluru was actually executed on the ground? That's less than 19%. Have some of our cities grown up too big and unwieldy for a top down master plans? I concluded the previous episode on urban planning with the fact that many big livable cities across the world have abandoned master plan to plan their cities. So, what takes its place? How do they keep their city still orderly and livable? What does it take for us to get these systems in India? Hi, I am Sathya Sankaran, and you are watching the OoruLabs podcast. Let us see if we can answer these questions in today's episode. I raised a question in the previous episode of why some countries have abandoned master plans. It is not because they don't plan. It is just that their plan fits in a structure where the quality of infrastructure has already been established. And the neighborhood plans fit in snugly like a Lego block into these defined processes. These cities did initially have a plan. They even had master plans at some time, but over time they matured to a more dynamic model which fits into their structure. They abandoned the need to make time consuming, monolithic, infrequently updated master plan. Instead, needs are identified at the local level, necessary negotiations to arrive at the trade offs are made, and the execution is guided by neatly defined processes and systems so as not to disrupt the overall gestalt of the place. I will give you the example of London to explain how this works. As you know from the previous episode, London was dirty, it was grimy from industrial development with a very poor quality of life for its residents who worked in these factories, and that's how the city grew around these industrial factories. They began to introduce green and gardens into their city, and thus began the process of urban planning itself because they wanted that balance. This has evolved over many decades, with London becoming an agglomeration of many small boroughs or smaller cities equivalent, right? The Greater London Authority with a mayor is in charge of this larger city. Transport for London, or TfL, is an entity which supports the Mayor of London's transport strategy. They do this by helping planning applicants who apply from on the developer's behalf. The rest of the TfL, the Greater London Authority or the GLA, the boroughs and the stakeholders to combine land use and transport planning. So, any building or a development in the city that is proposed to be built will be submitted to the city council via a planning body. TFL steps in to understand, validate, and negotiate these transport plans for the property. This is the land use and the transport integration. The spatial planning unit and other units will discuss with these building planners how people will move into and out of the property, if the property needs some additional facilities like turn lanes, junctions, or traffic lights, or even tunnels and bridges to be built. The property developer will be asked to foot some of the cost for it or make some of the changes in line with the practices that are to be followed. If the movement of people needs new bus routes to be created or stops to be created, or for a substantial enough development area, probably a train line to be built, those will be accommodated as well. All this is seamless because not just is TFL responsible for the roads and bridges, they are also responsible for the trains and buses as well. Think about this in a city like Bengaluru. I spoke about this planning failure issue in light of a traffic chaos around a new mall in North Bengaluru that showed up early 2024 or late 2023. I've spoken about this in episode 2 of season 2 with Professor Ashish Verma of the Indian Institute of Science Sustainable Transportation Lab. Go watch it here. First of all, a single planning body like TFL doesn't exist in Bengaluru. An act was recently passed to set up an empowered Bengaluru Metropolitan Land Transport Authority or BMLTA. It was passed in the assembly. But the action to notify the rules so it can actually hire the staff, put the process, and begin work has not been done. The Department of Town and Country Planning, for example, doesn't want BMLTO to exist because they probably feel threatened that BMLTO will need to approve their plans from a land use perspective. But it's illogical to think that land use and transport are not interrelated. Like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, TFL, for example, state it in their objective for their existence itself that land use and transport planning are integral. So one department has become an obstruction because they feel threatened. This is why the government doesn't want to do good things. They are looking out for themselves, not for you and me. I've not heard of a single time when the Bengaluru City Corporation or BBMP has convened all the transport bodies to understand how to plan for new buildings. They usually write one note to the traffic police for large properties that may have a traffic impact, and that is it. Traffic police don't have planners on their rolls because they are an enforcement authority. The corporation doesn't have planners. The Department of Town and Country Planning or the DTCP only do master plans which never gets executed for the rest of the state. I haven't seen them do a single town planning scheme ever, which is one of their job is to create a town planning scheme. Bus companies like BMTC, train companies like BMRCL and K-Ride, who run the rolling stock and make their own routes, they don't even come onto the planning table. Right? They just think on their own. None of these people talk to each other at all. They are all literally enemies of each other on the field. They will refute this on camera. They will try to object to it, but that's what it is. Hence, BBMP will approve the property with a love letter to other departments to just cover their ass. The traffic police will have a few conversations with the developer and warn the property to take some action in their minds how they can think about it. In the end, they will have to deal with the mess after the shit hits the fan on day one of the property opening and the traffic starts streaming in. In fact, even in the Bengaluru City Corporation, the tender shore roads in the middle of the city look different from the road just off of it. Tender shore was a standard, however good or bad they might be, which apparently ensured better walkability and uniform carriageway with cycling tracks and other things. Why wouldn't you want to do that for every road? Why would another road right next to Tender Shore be completely different from Tender Shore if that is what is good for us? Our city authorities exist in the British era. All modifications to rules that they may have made since then doesn't lead to any good outcomes in the city. They only think it does. Even if they have identified the reason for their inability to deliver outcomes to citizens, they have no incentive to bell the cat. The bureaucracy has told different stories to the politicians to keep themselves in the job. So what is the moral of this story? It is not that the master plan will make this city, it may not even be a necessary condition. The more urgent need is the redesign of the underlying structures and the processes to enable day-to-day decision making and coordination. If the elected representative thinks there is no need for a transport planning authority or any such coordination authority, we know that a well-functioning city is not driving their decision. It is probably a desire to make hay for a few vested interests in the chaos, and these vested interests, like recently noted, has caught them in a trap. Watch my episode on public choice theory on why the government is not naturally incentivized to spend our money wisely or provide good outcomes, unless we care and ask them to. Another key need that is not as inanimate or unemotional as process and structure is people and talent. There is a need to have good talent in the government or around it. Studies show that even the introduction of a few high performing people can lift up the rest of the team's productivity by up to 25%. Of course, considering the Indian bureaucracy, people at most middle and junior levels are filled with fear, greed, envy, and one-upmanship. Hence, that percentage of a bump in productivity might be a lot less than that. Nevertheless, mediocrity in government bureaucracy leads to mediocrity in the city. Building a culture of performance of serving the customer who are the citizens needs a sea change in the mental models of the governance itself and the people in the government. The customer for bureaucracy today is anyone but the citizen. It is usually their bosses or the politicians or most likely the state prosecutor who will defend them when things go wrong. It is a bad word in the bureaucracy to be citizen centric. I have had many of them tell me flat out that they are not accountable to the citizens and have no obligation to meet them or listen to them. They are accountable to the minister in charge only. Finally, does this all mean we shouldn't do a master plan? Maybe not. While we have established that building level we can make dynamic decisions and at local level we will be able to make some spatial decision, there needs to be a larger regional level network linkages that need to be thought through, like the transportation networks, the energy networks, the water networks, the sewerage networks. All of these need to be coordinated larger than one local level. We don't want one ward, for example, planning a 20-meter wide road, and then as soon as you step into the other ward, it narrows down to 8 meters. That is not going to work. Except for that, every other decision needs to be driven by systems at the local level. We may call it structure plan, master plan, federated plan, comprehensive development plan, or even just the idea of a city. Whatever it is just useful to put them all together as they arise and see how the city shapes up jointly. In the end, action on the ground moves in far more entropic ways than we can imagine. For example, the food street in my locality filled with food carts just got moved 1 kilometer away to the corner of the neighborhood by the local MLA, away from a new hospital that is building on a civic site. The local resident complained that the food carts block the street. Now the hospital crowd is going to overflow onto the street. Probably the residents and the people accept this as a better alternative than having food carts blocking the same street. These are the kind of incidents and requirements and mindsets that repeat across many of India's cities at the local level. None of this is in any master plan. But if a structure allowed for the analysis of impact of this decision and consequent decision making across different government bodies, maybe we can manage the city better. But who will bell this cat? Let me conclude by saying defining customer centricity in government is required to complete the triangle of systems, talent, and customer. That can help us deliver a good quality of life as an emergent outcome for the citizens. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below.